This is the first part of our discussion of Chapter 4 from American Media History, A Press for the Masses. And we'll be looking at a time period from about 1833 to 1860. And what we'll see is an entirely different political system, an entirely different press system. You know, when you think about this time period, it's comparable to other parts of American history when it seems like just a page gets turned. Certainly, the Civil War was one of those times where whatever the country was like beforehand, it was completely different afterwards. The 1960s represent a similar period where, as you go into the early 60s, it's one way, and by the time you leave in 1970, it's completely different. Well, that's the sense I have for the changes that occurred during the period that we're talking about. So first of all, it was a period of rapid growth in the U.S. population. It more than doubled from 12 million to 30 million people. This is primarily due to European immigrants from England and Ireland and Wales and Germany and Scandinavia and Poland, and you name it. They came from all over to this new great land. In addition, from Europe came wonderful new machines. The machine age in the United States and the Industrial Revolution began during this period. Part of that was a transportation revolution. Roads were built in ways that were much more passable and easy to follow by horse and wagon. In addition to existing rivers, canals were built so that travel by boat was much easier. Railway track was laid across the continent during the 19th century and certainly during the middle of the 19th century, so that train travel, both for people and for goods, transformed the economy, really. And then, of course, the Pony Express, in which riders could take information across the continent in 8 days. In terms of newspapers, in 1830, there were 1,300s, and 30 years later, there were over 4,000. So a tremendous proliferation. And part of it has to do with the change in the model of journalism in the United States. Well, leading up to 1930, the President of the United States was Andrew Jackson. He was the 7th President of the United States. So we go from our discussion of press and the founding of the nation from Washington and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. We don't really talk about James Madison and James Monroe and John Quincy Adams. It's not that nothing was happening there, but there was a lot going on that was similar to what was happening in the founding of the nation. But Andrew Jackson was like none of the previous presidents. He did not have the same educational level. He was not of the same social class, even though there was a great belief in democracy, that there were no social classes. He certainly came from a poorer background. He was self-educated, and he saw himself as the president for the people being the workers, the farmers, the laborers. He saw deep conflict in society between those who produced the wealth and the business community, which held the upper hand. So it was, lots of people around the world, including Karl Marx, were observing these kinds of inequities among workers who created a tremendous amount of wealth and yet did not share in that wealth. So Jackson drew a class of people who previously had not had access to the halls of power or participation, despite the wonderful dreams of democracy. So Andrew Jackson, Jacksonian democracy is called the era of the common man. There was an emphasis in politics on equality. There was emphasis on equal economic opportunity. There was a move away from monopolistic capitalistic practices and a simplified means of finance and economy. During the time, business was democratized, as were politics, more so, as we've been saying. And so the masses of people, the American people, really for the first time gained a voice in both business and in government. So Andrew Jackson saw the press as a means of reforming business, government, and politics. So into this comes what we call the penny press, which is the beginning of a new way of doing journalism. In 1833, newspapers were established as capitalist institutions. This is in contrast to the partisan press or the party press that we were talking about in the founding of the nation. Newspapers went from being owned and operated by politicians and political parties to being owned by independent private editors, and it made a huge difference. The funding came from advertising and subscriptions by the poor, okay, people who never really had access to a more expensive kind of newspaper at the time. Part of the reason this could happen was the introduction of the steam-powered cylinder press. I'm going to move down to a picture to just show you the 6-cylinder rotary press. It was a huge monstrosity. Nonetheless, for the first time, thousands of pages could be printed as opposed to the limited 350 per day with the hand-cranked presses. The press system was, under Jackson, became free of government control and free of political parties. It's not that the press was less political, but they were not owned and operated by politicians. Let me qualify that. Some of the major politicians, or the editors of this period, were politicians, but they didn't see their newspapers as a political organ for their own political views. There was a focus on news, and because the price went down from 6 cents to 1 cent, it was available to virtually anybody. So there came to be new ideas about truth and the responsibility of the press, and as we'll see, a new meaning of the power of the press. So the first newspaper that we identify as part of this penny press period was Benjamin Day's New York Sun. Day was inspired by the 1832 penny magazine in England, which was intended to educate the masses in England. He started the Sun in 1833, and because he was able to lower the price, it was an immediate success among immigrants who couldn't afford the 6 cents. Furthermore, the content reflected their lives, what they were interested in. So he came up with, during this period, innovations in news and innovations in advertising. One of the innovations in news was sensationalism, an emphasis on human interest stories, crime stories, sex stories, scandals, things like that. This had not been part of the political press at all. It was something brand new, and Benjamin Day, as a businessman, understood that these were the kinds of things that would sell newspapers. Now, we've gone through several time periods in the history of American press where sensationalism has been, it's sort of the hallmark, and then new newspapers come in and say it's time to clean house, and so they start what they consider to be better quality. Benjamin Day revolutionized advertising. He did it in a number of ways. He changed the nature of advertising, so it appealed to the masses. It was, loud in terms of the size of print that was used, illustrations, things that anybody could read and understand. He had a cash in advance policy, and he also made the price accessible to smaller businessmen. He also developed the help wanted columns, advertisements that brought together employers and workers. Benjamin Day introduced newsboys. Maybe you have in your mind an image of boys standing on the street corner yelling, "Extra, extra, read all about it." Well, although that is a Hollywood depiction, it nonetheless is an innovation that Benjamin Day brought about. This was a new way of distributing newspapers. It was, again, made possible because of the press that could print so many copies. And so newspapers were able to come out daily and even have extra editions later in the day. So all this is to say that the New York Sun, after 6 months of publication, had a circulation of 8,000. James Gordon Bennett is one of the great heralded editors of the 19th century. I'm going to stop here and come back in our second part to talk about James Gordon Bennett and Horace Greeley as great editors of this time.